This episode is brought to you by Kia's first 3-row all-electric SUV, the Kia EV9, with available all-wheel drive and seating for up to 7 adults, with a 0 to 60 speed that thrills you 1 minute and available reclining lounge seats that unwind you the next. Visit kia.com/EV9 to learn more. Ask your Kia dealer for availability. No system, no matter how advanced, can compensate for all driver error and or driving conditions. Always drive safely.
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Julie Wilson about the importance of effective leadership coaching in organizations. Julie Wilson, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the chance to chat with you. It was fun just chatting in our pre-interview and getting to know you a little bit better and understanding a little bit more about your background. And I think the listeners will really enjoy our discussion today. Today, we're going to be focusing on the importance of effective leadership coaching in organizations, how we can do that better, some of the tools that are available to help us do that, and really why it's important to coach leaders and to prepare the next generation of leaders within organizations. As we get started today, I just wanted to share Julie's bio with the listeners. Julie Wilson can show you how great you can become, and she helps you to get there. She is an author, consultant, and leadership coach. Her workplace skill building programs have helped thousands of employees and managers step into their potential as leaders and increase their creativity, collaboration, and problem-solving capabilities of their teams. She's the co-founder of the Academic Leadership Group, the founder of the Institute for the Future of Learning, and an instructor at Harvard Extension School. Julie graduated from the Harvard Graduate School of Education with a master's degree in education, specializing in adult development, learning technology, and behavioral change. That is a really awesome background, and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to have the chance to talk with you today.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
Anything you would like to add by way of background or context for the listeners before we really jump in?
Well, I have come to motherhood somewhat late in life. I am 46 and I have a 2.5-year-old son. So I would say my learning curve is perpendicular right now. Leaders and I discuss the whole concept of our VUCA world and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. And I feel like motherhood right now is throwing a whole bunch of complexity and ambiguity at me, and it's really helping me dig into, I guess, a whole other part of my work, which I'm quite happy to coach other people on, but which I'm pretty bad at myself, which is taking things more slowly, pausing, smelling roses, and having a toddler really helps to slow me down and help me notice and I guess maybe take things a little bit easier than what I have in the past. So the lessons are abundant right now. I think he's going to be my greatest teacher.
Well, that's excellent. Congratulations. Kids are a joy and a handful. Mm-hmm. I have 6 children myself, though mine are a little bit further along. My oldest is 16, my youngest is 7. And so we're past the baby and toddler stage. But every day is an adventure for sure. So I wish you well as you navigate everything. Yeah. Well, so today we're going to really be honing in on leadership coaching. And I know that's something you spend a lot of time doing. And I'm sure, in addition to your own practice and your own consulting work, that's probably something you spend a lot of time focusing on in your work with the Harvard Extension School and working with executives and other students in that capacity. It's a really important area because in my experience, a lot of organizations don't put enough thought towards, well, not just their own leadership effectiveness, but also leadership succession and just preparing the next generation of leaders to take the reins when the opportunity arises or necessitates. And I think right now we're in this COVID environment where we have a heightened sense of urgency to address all these organizational challenges and problems. And it's more important than ever that we really have a breadth across the organization of highly trained, highly skilled, capable people that can take on leadership roles.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in some organizations, it almost feels like the higher up you get in the organization, it's development by Darwinian evolution. If you can work this out and be successful, then great. But many organizations, I think, put in more scaffolding and support to really help meaningful leadership development, not just go off and go to a course for 2 days, but how do we think about talent in this organization? So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And people go off to conferences, they do retreats, they do seminars. You have things like LinkedIn Learning, so people can hop on in real time in the gaps of their day. They can do a little bit of training here and there. All of this is great. All of these are great tools, and I hope people utilize those resources. Podcasts like this and other podcasts. There's so much content. There's so many great resources out there, but it's got to be more than just tuning into a podcast or just doing a quick LinkedIn Learning, course, or doing a 2-day retreat or going to a seminar. Leadership development's much more than that, and it needs to be structured. It needs to be sustained over time, because it requires application. Just reading a book or just listening or just watching, that can help you absorb information, but then you have to apply the information into practice so that you can actually make improvements and stretch your skills and your capabilities.
Yes, you reminded me, I remember reading a book one time, a great book on presentation skills, and the final page the author said, there's a lot of recommendations on how to practice and really generating as many practice opportunities as possible. And I think one of his final sentences was, those who practice get better and those who don't. So the importance of...
Yeah, that's a succinct way of putting it.
Very helpful.
That's very good. So how can I tell how I'm doing as a leader? So I'm in an organization, I have a team of people that report to me, or maybe I'm even above middle management and I'm up into the executive levels. You're getting bombarded constantly. You have pressures from all sides. You have all these stresses and tensions, all these priorities. How do you know how you're doing as a leader, and how do you put the time in to focus on that?
Yes, a couple of ways that I invite clients to think about feedback. So one is the higher up the organization you go, the less likely you are to receive candid feedback if you ask people for it directly. So the cliche questions of how am I doing? The response to that is usually a nodding of the head and 2 thumbs up. Yeah, you're doing great. It really doesn't elicit a candid response. But if you were to make that more specific and in conversation with your team, say, okay, here are our goals, here's where we're headed. And a great question, just an open-ended question would be, what should I keep doing to help lead us towards these goals? Stop doing and start doing. That keep, stop, start really generates a lot of, in my experience, really useful, focused, targeted feedback, because that feedback then tells you exactly what you should keep, stop, start doing, and you get to see some of the themes. Now, of course, it depends on how much trust and transparency that you've built on your team up until that point. And in some cases as well, the overarching culture of your organization. I've worked with folks and they've decided to put it out just on a Google Sheets or Qualtrics or some sort of Survey Monkey, just as 3 open-ended questions, and then they get anonymous responses back. Some folks say, no, I'd like to really have the part of the process as I build a more open and transparent culture within our team. So it depends on your meta-level cultural goals there. And then another option, this is a great idea from a book called Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. They're both two folks out of the program of negotiation at Harvard Law. And just great question. What do you see me doing or failing to do that holds me back as a leader?
I love those questions, and in part because of the simplicity. It doesn't take some huge, complicated instrument to give you insights to yourself and to help you make the necessary positive changes, that will have pretty big impact on your team, your people, and your own approach, your own style, your own effectiveness. Now, I'm not saying that to say that other more complex instruments aren't useful, but you don't need them to get started. At least you really can just do something very simple. You can use existing free softwares to collect the data, the information, just having those simple conversations with people even. There's lots of ways to do it, and we can all get started today. That's the thing, is you don't need any expensive software package to do it right away to get started. You don't need even a high-paid consultant. And I know both of us do consulting, so maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot by saying that, but you don't need us to get started. Now, you might want us as you get more into the nuances and the complexities and whatnot, but to get started on the right foot, it really isn't that complicated. And you can just ask some of those basic questions and start to listen and start to really pay attention to what people are saying. If you can do that, that's half the battle. And then from there, you can start to build in the complexity.
Well said. I think all it requires is courage. It's a courageous act, I think, to ask your team and to genuinely want to know, what's working well and what might you do differently, what needs to be improved. And the reality is people know it's there anyway. So why wouldn't you take the development opportunity, ask for it, and then continue to, really strengthen your leadership?
Yeah, excellent. Well, one of the tools that I really have liked in the past is some sort of a 360 feedback instrument. Now, again, these can be incredibly simple in how they're used, or they can get into much more complex types of instruments that allow for a lot of different quantitative analyses to get into all the particulars of a leader's style and approach and communication and strategy and all that kind of stuff. Can you talk us through a little bit of your experience using 360 feedback tools, how you've seen them working, and whether or not you feel like they're effective and why?
Sure. I'm kind of torn, to be honest, when it comes to 360 tools. One of the big reasons why I'm torn is it does tend to perpetuate a culture of anonymity with giving feedback. And I would love to see, I know it won't happen overnight, but I don't know, maybe 10 years from now, could there be a more open culture in organizations of giving feedback? Another sort of pet peeve that I have is it can take the rater anywhere between 40 minutes and an hour to complete. And everybody's so busy these days, that can take an incredible amount of time. It might reduce your response rate. And then I was reading recently an article in Harvard Business by Marcus Buckingham, where he talks about the rater effect. And if I'm asked, how responsible is Jonathan, that's through my filter of my own responsibility. And I will rate that differently compared to somebody else because our lenses are different. So there's that, reliability part of it. Then on the flip side, I have met folks, and this tends to be more often earlier in their career, maybe their first management position, where they've had a pretty basic to intermediate 360, and it revealed a couple of blind spots that they obviously weren't aware of, and it was super helpful in really helping them get to their next level of management and then leadership. So as you can tell, comments here, I am kind of torn when it comes to 360s. The more senior folks with whom I've worked on 360, the most typical response I get is, that was interesting and didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. So then my mind goes to, okay, well, how much did this cost? Both in the price of the instrument and also in the time into everybody's time to complete it. And would there be maybe a quicker, less expensive, more impactful way to do this?
Yeah, all great thoughts. And absolutely there's pros and cons. And I think it's also worth noting that there's 360 is kind of a general approach to feedback. And there's so many different types of instruments that are out there. So basically, I imagine most listeners know what a 360 is, but where you get peer evaluation, you get a supervisor evaluation, you have direct report evaluations, maybe even a customer evaluation, different people from all angles providing feedback on you. What I love about that is it really helps you to see how others perceive you. So it's really holding up that mirror right in front of your face. And sometimes it can be a little painful and a little difficult, but it can often illustrate some of the gaps in your own perception versus other people's perception. And so if I rate myself a certain way, but then I see, other people rating me another way, then it's not even about who's right or wrong or who has a biased perception. It's just pointing out that there's a perception gap that needs to be addressed, right? And so I think that's useful. But your point about long instruments is super valid, and I've seen some just crazy long 360 feedback instruments, and the more complicated the instrument, the more types of analyses they can do with it, presumably. But is it worth the extra time for the types of insights that you're getting back? Because I've had a similar experience as you, where people will look at the full report, this 50-page report that's produced off of this 40+ minute long instrument that all these people did on them, and it takes them forever to navigate through the report and try to understand it. And then once they do, they realize, oh yeah, I knew that, and it doesn't really seem to be worth the time. However, if you can craft a good 360 feedback instrument with a handful of quantitative elements and maybe a handful of qualitative, open-ended types of responses that people can reply to, and it only takes like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you can still get a lot of really great insights, and it's not nearly as expensive. It doesn't take as much time, so there's not as much opportunity cost involved doing it, and you can still get that kind of 360 view. So I don't know. I think sometimes leaders get a little too excited about the feedback to the point where it just becomes excessive. But I suppose if we're in a world where leaders don't think they need feedback, or they're not taking the time to get the feedback, if the alternative is doing a ridiculously long 360 or doing nothing, I'd rather have them do the ridiculously long 360. But that's not the only choice. Obviously, it's not that kind of false dichotomy. And there are a lot of options. And so I know both you and I have used those types of instruments in the past. I've created unique instruments based on the input of employers, and it can be fairly straightforward, fairly quick and easy to do, and it doesn't need to take all the time, and it doesn't need to be so expensive, and still get that valuable feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what other types of tools have you used that have been helpful as you've done leadership development work?
So probably the one that I'm using the most right now, that I'm finding most useful over time, is a qualitative interview. So this gets to specificity and also gets to that 360 benefit that you mentioned, where you're getting a really broad and in many ways deep and their impact. So for example, peers, colleagues, direct reports, folks up above, maybe key stakeholders inside and outside the organization. More folks are asking, for example, to interview with vendors and key partners, because we're all part of these massive global supply chains these days. And just asking a few simple questions. What are John's strengths? In what ways might John leverage those strengths even more? where do you see John's strengths getting in the way? What are some areas of development? And if you could whisper one word of advice to John, what might that be? And what I'm finding is in 30-minute interviews, the really powerful piece that I'm able to distill are the themes, but then most importantly, the what I call the excerpts. So these are verbatim quotes that I can still retain anonymity, but it's so powerful whenever I give the download to the client. And if somebody, has gotten feedback before that, their listening skills aren't great, that's pretty generic. What do you do with that? So if I'm interviewing somebody and they say, Julie's listening skills aren't great, I would say, can you give me an example? And then they might give an example of, I was in a meeting and, she rolled her eyes when I made a comment. And I would follow up with them, what was the impact of that on you? And they would say something hypothetically like, well, I shut down and basically don't say an awful lot in our meetings anymore. So then I can feed that back to Julie and say, you may or may not intend this. And sometimes folks have body language and they literally have no clue the message that is being sent. And when I share the impact of the behavior, it really lands in a very different way. And moreover, it gives behaviorally specific, ideas, directions where they can take it. So, and again, it doesn't have to be complicated. Something as simple as don't roll your eyes. So then, Julie can say in a meeting, okay, it's been brought to my attention that I rolled my eyes. A, I didn't know I was doing it. Maybe B, I did. And that's not helpful. So I want you to just raise a hand or give some sort of signal if I do that. And my coach is going to follow up in 3 months to check in to see how I'm doing on this. I'm going to screw up, it's not going to be perfect, but my goal is, better behavior over time. And the combination of the qualitative interview and then a 90-day and then a 6-month follow-up is really powerful, because at the end of the day, any 360-degree tool is only as good as the follow-up that does or does not happen afterwards.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Well, Julie, it has really been a pleasure. The time has gone far too quickly. We're about out of time. And I do really appreciate all of your insights that you've shared and the tips that you've shared with us about leadership development. Before we part ways, though, today, can you share with the listeners a little bit more about how they can get connected with you and how they can learn more about you and your work?
Sure. If you go to academicleadershipgroup.com, you will see my bio there, and also articles that myself and my colleague Jenny have written over the years. And also I've encouraged folks to connect with me via LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. And I encourage listeners to connect with Julie as well. It's really, truly been a pleasure, Julie, talking with you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day and that you stay healthy and safe and find meaning and purpose at work.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week. Check out our new weekly LinkedIn newsletter, Alchemizing Human Capital, exploring industry trends via original research and interviews with executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We look forward to having you join us.